In Chapter 4, we're at Lesson 6. We only have 3 lessons left, and these 3 lessons are switching from multiplication into division. So in the first 5 lessons, we were multiplying fractions, and now we're going to be dividing fractions. However, you're going to find out that dividing fractions is really multiplying in disguise. But before we start, it is still that same snow day that I spent making math videos all day. And here is our next Christmas village. It is the music house. So in this house, they give music lessons. It is the Harmony Lane music house. And they have a snowman decorated with a violin and 2 kids that are practicing outside of the house. Okay, dividing whole numbers by fractions. Division always sounds scary for some kids, but let me tell you, multiplication in disguise. So here we go. Our vocab word was reciprocal. Make sure that you have a definition for reciprocal. And reciprocals are really easy because they're just the flip of a fraction. So the fraction 3/4 has the reciprocal of 4/3. 2/7 is 7/2. So the reciprocal times the reciprocal is going to give you 1. And this is important because that's what makes dividing fractions easy using reciprocals. So any 2 numbers with a product of 1, so fraction times fraction equals 1, those numbers are reciprocals. Complete the table below by finding the reciprocal of 2/3. Use the guess, check, and revise strategy. The first one is done for you. So 1/2 times 2 is 1. And by the way, think of 2 as a fraction. 1 times 2 is 2. 2 times 1 is 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. So 2/3. If you do that reciprocal, which sadly we already kind of know what it is, gave it away, 2 times 3 is 6, 3 times 2 is 6, 6 divided by 6 is 1. So the reciprocal of 2/3 is 3/2. All right, and again, we already talked about, oh, by the way, if you want to, you can put, oh my gosh, you can put this here. So 1/2 reciprocal is 2/1. 2/3 reciprocal is 3/2, 3/2. So basically, the reciprocal of a fraction is just the numerator and denominator flipped. So reciprocal of a fraction equals numerator and denominator flipped. Like, look at this airplane. 1/2, 2/1. So it did a little upside down flip, and that's what the reciprocal is. Now, let's get into the lesson to see why we care about reciprocals. So we're dividing whole numbers by fractions. On this side, we're going to just practice finding reciprocals. So it's going to be super, super fast. And on this side, we're going to use reciprocals to divide. So first, practice finding reciprocals, then use them to divide. Here we go. Dividing 3 by 1/2 gives the same result as multiplying 3 by 2, which is the reciprocal of a half. So the rule is, any 2 numbers with a product of 1 are called reciprocals. We already talked about that, but I want to talk about what this is asking us to. Actually, let's talk about that on the next page. So the reciprocal 1/2 is 2/1. That's what we talked about at the beginning of the lesson. And this is just kind of starting to get us into how to divide by a fraction. So let's just worry about the reciprocals first. This says the examples suggest that you invert the fraction to find the reciprocal. That is, switch the numerator and the denominator. You can use reciprocals to divide fractions. So this switch the numerator and the denominator, that's basically what we wrote right here. The numerator and the denominator are flipped for a reciprocal of a fraction. So find the reciprocal of 2/3. Since 2/3 times 3/2 is 1, the reciprocal of 2/3 is 3/2. The reciprocal of 1/8 is 8/1, and 1/8 times 8/1 is 1. So what's the reciprocal of 5? Remember, 5 is a fraction, is 5/1. So 5/1, the reciprocal is 1/5. So the reciprocal is 1/5. So down here, 3/5, that reciprocal would be 5/3. I don't know if I should put an equal sign. I'm going to put an arrow sign because they're not equal to each other. So the reciprocal is 5/3. Flip this, 3/1, which is 3, right? So A is 5/3, B is 3. What's the reciprocal of 11? Now remember, 11 is this is an improper fraction. So the reciprocal would be 1/11. Okay, see what I mean by that super fast? So now this is telling us 3 divided by 1/2 is 6. 3 times 2 is 6. So let's talk about what 3 divided by 1/2 even means. If you have 3 wholes, so this is 3 divided by 1/2. You have 3 wholes and you divide it into half. Then how many parts do you have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6. Now, a mathematician discovered, wow, 3 divided by 1/2 is 6. 3, change division to multiplication. Change 1/2 to the reciprocal. Look at this. 3 times 2 is 6. So the rule is, when dividing by a fraction, you can multiply by its reciprocal. So we know how to multiply. We're experts by now at multiplying. So this makes division super easy. We don't even have to divide. We just find the reciprocal and multiply. So this is going to be our big idea. To divide a whole number by a fraction, multiply by its reciprocal. There you have it. So 5 divided by 2/3 equals 5/1 times 3/2. You just swap that, do the reciprocal, you flip it. You swap out the division for multiplication, you flip the fraction, and it's the second fraction, not the first one. It has to be the divisor. All right. Now, before we move on, I want to talk about what 5 divided by 2/3 means. The division expression 5 divided by 2/3 is read as 5 divided by 2/3. You need to find how many 2/3 are in 5. So I'm going to draw this out so you can kind of see a visual of it. If you have 5 wholes and you're trying to divide it into 2/3, I'm going to divide all of these into thirds. Here's 2/3, here is 2/3, 2. Well, how many 2/3 are there? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These 2 make 6. These 2 make 7. And then there's 1/3 left. So you have 7, and 1/3 is half of 2/3. So you have 7.5 2/3. Now, that takes a lot of mental power to figure that out, especially the part at the end where you're like, okay, 1/3 is a half of a 2/3. So it's way easier to write out the equation here and multiply across. 5 times 3 is 15. 1 times 2 is 2. And then 2 goes into 15 7 times with 1/2 left over. So you get the same answer. It's just, this is really difficult to understand and think through. There's a lot of room for error. Let's look at example 4. It'll kind of take us through the visual again too. Find 2 divided by 1/3 and write it in simplest form. So here's the model. Model the dividend 2. So this is like 2 wholes. And divide each whole into thirds. Think, how many thirds are in 2? So you have 6 thirds, 6 sections in this 2. Or you can use an equation. So we're going to see if we can get the answer 6 here. 2 divided by 1/3 is like 2 times the reciprocal, 3/1. So multiply across, 2 times 3 is 6, 1 times 1 is 1, and you get that same answer. Let's look at number 5 using the equation. 7 divided by 2/3. We're going to swap out the division for multiplication. So 7, and then we need the reciprocal for the divisor here. See that? 2/3 reciprocal is 3/2. So multiply the numerators and multiply the denominators. 7 times 3 is 21. 1 times 2 is 2. So now let's simplify that, or rather turn it into a mixed number. 2 times 10 is 20, and there'd be 1/2 left over. Let's do the examples D, E, and F together here. So 6 divided by 1/3 is like 6 times 3/1. So 6 times 3 is 18/1. Our answer, our product, is 18. It's our quotient too. It's kind of funny. What about this? I'm going to draw a line here. So 5 divided by 2/3. I'm going to make this a fraction. Swap this out for multiplication. Flip these guys so we have the reciprocal. Can't simplify, so I'm going to multiply across. And I swear we just had this up here. Oh yeah, 5 divided by 2/3. So 15/2 is 7.5. All right, now let's do this last example. Change 4 into a fraction, swap out division for multiplication, flip for the reciprocal, and then multiply across since we can't simplify. Okay, 3 goes into 16. So 3 times 5 is 15, and then there'd be 1/3 left over. So the trick here is to divide by a fraction. You swap out the division for multiplication, and the divisor changes to the reciprocal. Okay, let's turn to the last example. Page 308. At summer camp, the duration of a field hockey game is 3/4 of an hour. The camp counselors have set aside 6 hours for field hockey games. How many games can be played? So you need to divide 6 by 3/4. 6 divided by 3/4 is the same thing as saying 6 times 4/3. You can simplify by dividing by 3. 2 times 4 is 8. 1 times 1 is 1. So 8 games can be played. Now, what if you split this up all into fourths and found out how many fourths there were? So how many 3/4 there are. So that's 1, that's 2, that's 3, that's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So you get the same answer either way. Time for the guided practice. All right, for the guided practice, we're doing 1 through 7. So I'm going to circle all 1 through 7. And let's start with number 1, 2, and 3. All you're doing is finding the reciprocal. So 2/3, you flip it, 3/2. 1/7, flip it, 7/1, which is 7. And then 4 is like 1/4, so the reciprocal, or I'm sorry, 4/1, so the reciprocal is 1/4. Now we have to find the reciprocal so we can divide. So 2 divided by 1/3 is like 2 times 3/1. That's 6. Okay, set up number 5. 2 divided by 4/5 is like 2 times what? You can simplify and then multiply across. 5/2. 2 goes into 5 twice with 1/2 left over. Okay, set this one up. Multiply by the reciprocal. Can't do any simplifying, so multiply across. All right, let's see here. How many times does 2 go into 35? 2 times 15 is 30. So 2 times 16 is 32. So 2 times 17 is 34. So 17, and there'd be 1/2 left over. Now, the story problem, like example 6. A neighborhood development that is 4 acres is to be divided into 2/3 acre lots. So how many lots can be created? So you have 4 acres and you're dividing it into 2/3 lots. How many of these 2/3 will you have? You need to change this 4 into a fraction, swap this to multiplication, flip this into a reciprocal. Simplify, multiply across, and there you go. You can have 6 lots. Time for independent practice. Okay, so we're going to do number 1, 2, and 3, where you find the reciprocal of each number. Then we're going to do 4, 5, and 6, where you practice dividing by a fraction. And then we're going to do number 10 to practice one of those story problems. The story problem says Jamar has an 8-foot long piece of wood that he wants to cut to build a step stool for his treehouse. If each piece is going to be 5, 6 foot long, what is the greatest number of pieces he'll be able to use? So you have an 8-foot piece, and you're dividing it into 5, 6. All right, so number 1, the reciprocal of 3/5 is 5/3. 1/4, you flop it, you get 4/1, which is 4. The reciprocal of 1/1 is 1/1, which is 1. That one was awesome. 3 divided by 3/4 is like 3 times 4/3. Simplify, multiply across. 5 divided by 3/4 is like 5 times 4/3. And you multiply across. There's the mixed number. 8 divided by 4/7 is like 8 times 7/4. You can simplify before you multiply. And then 8 divided by 5/6 is 8 times 6/5, and multiply across. 40 divided by 5 is 8. Let's do the reflection. All right, Chapter 4, Lesson 6, Reflection, dividing whole numbers by fractions. Number 1, to divide whole numbers by fractions, I multiply by the what? To write the reciprocal of a number, I have to explain what you do. Write the reciprocal of each of those. And here's how I show my work to divide whole numbers by fractions. Please write your answer in simplest form. And then go ahead and do what one? Learning objective F, middle column, dividing whole numbers by fractions.